Hi, for watching this video. You're watching my video on how to purify water. In previous lessons, we talked about the importance of water, the scarcity of fresh water, and the reason why the ocean is undrinkable, because it's too salty or it has a high salinity. So the next natural step is to talk about, well, what can we do to increase the amount of fresh water we have available? And that is called water purification. So as we discussed, water is fundamental to all life. And the majority of Earth's water is unavailable as salt water, at the very least to us. Saltwater marine animals, things like that, they can survive in the salt water, but we can't. And so we need to find a way in order to access this water so that we have a larger supply of fresh water, because as our population increases, so does the demand for fresh water. So how do we get drinking water from the oceans? There are two main ways we're going to talk about: distillation and reverse osmosis. So what is distillation? We've talked about this before, and we're going to quickly review it. Distillation is the process of separating mixtures using heat and cooling. When we talked about this in chemistry back in the first term, we talked about how you can separate mixtures based on their different specific heat capacity or based on their different boiling points. Before we talked about oil, right? The different fuels of oil separated based on their boiling points. Well, we can do the same thing with water and salt, right? So in this picture we have water and ethanol, but we could replace the ethanol with salt and say the same thing, right? As this is heated, the water will evaporate. The water will change states from liquid to gas. The salt will stay at the bottom. As the water leaves, the salt is left behind because it doesn't boil at the same temperature water does. So it needs to be heated way more to boil the salt. But you only need 100 degrees to boil water. So the water is going to boil away and leave the salt behind. As it does this, it goes through this, which cools the water, which turns it from gas back into liquid, and it drips out into another jar. And so now you have the water without the salt, resulting in fresh water, right? As salt water is heated, the water evaporates and the salt is left behind, right? Here we see that. Then the steam condenses, which is the term used for moving from gas to liquid back into water via a different vial called a cooling tube or a condenser. And so as this water turns back into liquid, it drips back down into the other vial. And so we get fresh water. In this video, we'll talk about that. Osmosis is the process of diffusion, the diffusion of water through a semi-permeable membrane. Right? And so if you recall from when we talked about biology, we talked about diffusion and osmosis. And diffusion is the movement from high concentration to low concentration. Osmosis is the movement of water through a membrane from high concentration to low concentration. So when we look at this picture and we see, we'll call these little balls salt and the pink stuff water. Well, when you look at the left and right side, even though they're at the same level, this side has more water, right? They're at the same level, they take up the same space, but because this has more of those salt crystals in it, there's less water on this side than on this side, right? There's less water on this side than on this side. There's more water taking up this space, while on this side there's more salt taking up this space. So because this membrane only lets water through, the water is going to travel from high concentration to low concentration, moving from high to low. And you will see something like this. And so, yeah, the levels are different, but that's because the concentration of water and salt were different. And so now, when the water moves over, the concentration becomes the same because it's moving from high to low. So that's regular old osmosis, right? Water moves from high concentration to low concentration. There is a higher concentration of water on this side, right? The water moves from high concentration to low concentration. In reverse osmosis, you force the water to move against that concentration gradient. You're forcing water to move from low to high. You're forcing that water. In this salt water, you're applying this pressure to push this water through the membrane, because again, that membrane only lets water through. And so water is going to be pushed through and the salt's going to be left behind. So you're pushing water from low to high concentration. And that's why it's reverse osmosis. Pressure forces water through the membrane that only lets water through. This stops salt and other things from moving with the water. Again, the salt is stuck, blocked off by this membrane, while as pressure increases, the water is being pushed and forced out into the side, leaving the fresh water behind, or allowing the fresh water through and leaving the salt behind. Without the pressure, so if you released that pressure, if you just went, okay, we're stopping, the water would then flow back. Because again, you have this high concentration of fresh water and this low concentration of water on this side. So now the water is going to move back. Right? So you need to maintain this pressure. You need to keep applying pressure. You need to keep applying pressure to force the water to this side. You're moving the water from low to high concentration. As mentioned before, water is important to all life. And being able to turn salt water into drinkable water, also called potable water, is important for growing populations. Without these processes, such as distillation and reverse osmosis, we wouldn't be able to supply water to countries that are relatively dry. For example, South Africa relies on reverse osmosis. So does Australia. Without these processes, these places would have a very low supply of fresh water, and that could be very damaging to the societies that live there or that exist there. So that's why understanding fresh water, understanding the importance of water, and understanding how to purify water is very important. Hopefully you found this useful, and I'll see you next lesson.